subject, we we all have a chat box where you can ask your questions. Feel free to ask your questions about the subject or share your own struggles and experiences.
They will be responded to the end of the guest session. I will be collecting the most upvoted questions so that we answer them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Ankon Mitra sir. Sir is a trained architect and a natural artist who is fascinated by the geometry and mathematics of trees, flowers, hills, and coastlines. He is the design director of Hexagram Design Private Limited, where he works on a variety of resorts, farmhouses, hotels, and residences of various sizes and concepts. He was awarded a gold medal by Indian School of Planning and Architecture, that is also known as SPA. When he isn't thinking about vermicompost and flower hybrids, he studies textilizing geometries, folding processes in nature, and origami in paper, plastics, and metal. He also holds a postgraduate degree in parametric design, biomimicry, and advanced geometries from Balliol University College, London.
If origami is a religion, Ankon sir is the god. Ankon Mitra sir has brought new life to the ancient technique of origami, compelling his audience to sit up and take notice of the craft's potential. His extensive research on the traditional Japanese paper art has unearthed some of its most buried capabilities. As an origamist, I can relate to his theory that origami and the universe are intricately bound, because just as origami is all about an exquisite object by folding and unfolding by a square sheet, our universe constantly unfolds and folds itself into an infinite number of things.
Tanya, you're on mute again.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. Yeah. We want to hear it all from you, sir, yourself, like your journey in your own words. So I'd like to ask you to say a few words and address the audience by sharing your aesthetic experience.
Thank you so much for this very warm welcome. The warmth is indeed needed. It's very cold and chilly out here in Delhi. As you can see, I am totally covered in woolens. My journey into origami started a bit late in life. I studied architecture and then was practicing working as an architect, and then at some point I wanted to do my master's. And then while I was doing my master's, I was not doing my master's in landscape, although a significant portion of my practice is now landscape architecture. But I always had a love of the plant kingdom, as it were, and I think I'll start with a little presentation which I made, so that I can take you through this journey visually. I have done a full screen, but I think it's not. Just give me a moment. Okay, I'm doing a full share, but unfortunately, I think it's not coming. But yeah, I think I'll manage like this. So basically, these are just very quickly some vignettes from my landscape practice, because origami actually starts here, or it started with uh, this kind of work when I was engaging more with nature. And in nature, there, of course, all around us is geometry and there is design. And when you look at it in a certain way, then you start understanding certain things from it. So uh, this is a very nice example from 15th century Japanese woodcut. It shows this artist throwing up a piece of paper into the air, which transforms into a bird and flies away. So I'll not explain these quotations on the right, but if you quickly give a read to all of these, you see that all these things are connected, that art follows life, that we are all made of geometry, and that it continues through us and into everything. The universe is mathematics. The universe itself is a living organism, and the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. So typically what happens, when we are in school or we are in college, we study certain subjects for ease of teaching them, as well as for ease of us understanding them. They are divided into silos in a sense, or like clear divisions. Like, you understand this is biology, which is to do with living things, and physics is different from biology in the sense that it talks about forces in nature and the motion of things and so on and so forth. And mathematics is the abstraction of numbers, uh, which governs all things. And when you study art, then you say that, okay, these are the creative pursuits and things like that. But if you think about it, then there is a lot of mathematics happening in the human body. There is a lot of physics also happening in the human body. So all things are actually connected to each other. And however, that kind of thinking never really is encouraged in college or in school even. Your mathematics teacher will rarely, if ever, talk about biology, for instance, or the biology teacher will rarely, if ever, explain that a lot of processes in the human body happen through mathematical formulae. So in reality, this is what it is, that all things mesh into each other, and it's all very colorful and it's all very connected. And this is one of the lessons that origami taught me, is that to think about things through the connections that they have with each other. So I'm now going to quickly talk about some of those connections. So I have been researching folds for the last now 14 years. And in the living world all around us, from mushrooms to the way our fingers fold and unfold, to our lungs and our hearts and our brains, to how a frog jumps, to how a beetle flies, there is an immense amount of folding logic going on in the biological world, as also in the natural world, where rivers are moving to the oceans, coastlines of countries are being formed, sand dunes are formed and unformed from processes, as are mountains such as the Himalayas, which are called young fold mountains, and they are created and dissipated from processes of folding. So seeing the staggering amount of folding that there is in the world, one would then think that why is there this much amount of folding and what does it mean, and what is the rationale for um, this kind of folding to happen. And to get to the bottom of this, I started making very, very simple models of things that I saw and that fascinated me. For instance, this is the giant lily pad found in South America called the Victoria Amazonica. And when you look at the underside of it, I mean, it can measure up to 2.5 meters to sometimes 3 meters. And its light skin can support up to 2 human beings in weight. And you see the reason why when you lift it up and see the underside, which is that it's got this venation which looks like this system of folded branches. And to understand why a thin sheet material could become so strong so as to be floating on the water while at the same time supporting amazing amounts of weight, I made these paper models, which then kind of illustrated to me the system by which the venation, the sub-branching was actually happening. Here's another very lovely example, that of a caterpillar. And typically, if you see the caterpillar's body, it's got a system of striations, which are a kind of folds, sorry, excuse me, which allow the caterpillar to move by the action of rolling and unrolling. And at the same time, the body of the caterpillar is very sensitive to any surface on which it is walking. So the legs always keep the body slightly lifted from any surface where the caterpillar is actually moving. And to study this system of locomotion, as well as to see how the caterpillar actually protects itself in a threat situation, this was a paper model which was made where, as you can see, the down to the detail of the legs, how the model is actually lifted from the ground but is sitting on these pincer-like legs. And the degree of motion that the folds on the body allow the caterpillar to actually exhibit so that it can actually move like you've seen caterpillars moving. This is the underside of a mushroom. Again, a very good example of a ribbed system. And this is again a simulation on the left to kind of study how the structure actually creates this wonderful cantilever. So after making a lot of these studies over the years, I could categorize or ease the reasons why there would be so much folding in nature. To pack large things into small areas and to keep them deployable, in the sense that if you look at our eyelids, at certain times of day, we need light to come inside the eyes. So therefore, the eyelid remains in a state of folding. And at night, we need to block the light from the external stimuli, and therefore the eyelid is unfolded. So another example on the top shows you this beetle wing, which is that beetles can fly, but their wings are very sensitive to water and to the dust and pollen. So they have to keep the wings protected except when they are flying. So they there is a nature provides a Z-shaped spring-like fold inside the wing. So it is neatly packed inside the cover of the beetle. So when you see the beetle, typically you never see the wings. It's only when the beetle has to fly that it opens the covers and the wings unfurl and it flies off. The second reason you would have folding is to make weak material strong. So a good example is seashells. Another example which I gave is mushrooms. For instance, where you would have a system of ridges or of ribs, which would make a thin sheet material um, stronger. So structurally then, what would be discarded earlier as weak material can now be used. And the third reason is to increase the surface area. So sometimes you need, like in plants or in leaves, you need a certain size of area, but the overall um, dimension is limited. So what do? You add folds within that dimension so that um, the surface area actually increases. So in leaves, for instance, you need photosynthesis, but a leaf can be a certain size after which it becomes structurally untenable for the plant to support it. Similarly, the branches of trees, the length of our brains, um, all of that is something which is large amount of things packed into a small area, so that you get that what you need, which is the total length or the total surface area, but it still remains compact. And a good flexible example of this is a everyday use object like an umbrella, where when you don't need the umbrella, you pack it away, and all the material, which is the surface of the umbrella, gets packed into a very small cylinder, which you can keep in your bag or carry in your hand. And when it starts raining, or when the sun is too bright and you need the umbrella, then it opens out and suddenly you get this very large surface area which has unfolded from that small cylinder, and then you are able to use it. So for the purposes of increasing surface area and deployability, this is the third most important rationale or functionality of a folding system. So this, to my mind, very simply and beautifully sums up why there is so much folding in nature. If you look at our fingers, for instance, we have the flexibility to be able to do all possible things, from drawing to knitting to cooking to exercising to rolling a pin to make rotis. All this becomes possible because our fingers, at every joint, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 folds, 3 folds in total. Um, and fourth one is the phalange of the hand. And all of these 4 folds in total, 16 plus 1, 17 folds in the hand, along with the flexibility of the wrist, which is also a kind of a folding, allows you to fulfill all the functions that you can possibly think of. So in school geography, we learn about why I pick examples from diverse subjects is that it helps me to connect the fact that these things are in a sense all connected, and that we've been taught these subjects in disparate ways, so we never made those connections, but now you can. So in school geography, we are taught about latitudes and longitudes. The essential purpose of teaching these is so that we can locate something on the globe. And but if you think about it, it is not only a positioning system, but it's also a way for us to understand the geometry and then to help us to reconstruct it. So for instance, if you have a flat sheet of paper, now this is a good example that comes from it as to how a globe becomes a map. So suppose you have a map to begin with, and then you have to make a globe out of it. So I'll give an example in this case of an apple. The apple having a slightly more complex geometry than a sphere because it's got 2 dimples on the top and the bottom. Now, in your mind, if you think of this and you unroll the apple in a way that it's a flat sheet of paper, and you say, I want to construct an apple out of this from a 2-dimensional sheet to a 3-dimensional form, which is what architects do, right? You draw something on a flat sheet of paper, and then visually you're thinking all the time in 3 dimensions, because you need to make it 3-dimensional. Eventually you're going to enclose space and create a form. So here we are doing it literally, in the sense that the drawing that you're making on the sheet of paper will actually itself become the 3-dimensional object. So how do we do it? So we come back to the logic of the latitude and the longitude. Let's say you draw those on the sheet of paper, right? So you have the verticals, which are longitudes, and you have the horizontals, which are latitudes. And then you very simply just connect the nodes and create lots of diagonals. And then I tell you that, okay, we will not fold the horizontal lines, but we'll fold the diagonal lines, and we'll fold the vertical lines. So immediately, as soon as we do that, you start seeing a certain shape which is beginning to approximate an apple. Now, you know that a very specific location, let's say when you give your location to the Uber, if you click on the location or you click on Google Map and you see, then it says so and so degrees, and then after that there'll be 7-8 decimals, which means that it's going to that level of accuracy to pinpoint where your house is, or where your office is, or where your school is, so that the Uber driver can actually find your location. So that is called resolution, which means that the higher is the resolution or the detail of where you are located, the better is the chance of us getting a closer approximation of the shape, in this case of the apple. So if you make the folds finer and finer, although if you notice the shape that is emergent from the folding has all got straight lines, yeah, but the apple has got no straight lines. It's a 100% curved form. But in the shape of the apple here, if I'm making the straight line smaller and smaller, I'm approximating the curvature better and better. So these experiments or understanding of the geography led me to start making a plethora of these geometries. And then architecturally speaking, I was able to resolve this down to 5 or 6 specific basic architectural shapes. So cylinders, cones, spheres, ruled surfaces. A good example of a ruled surface is the mura that you sit on. It's actually a hyperbolic paraboloid. And the 6th one is a toroid. A toroid is essentially a donut. And if you cut a donut or a tire, and if you cut a donut or a tire in certain orientations, you get a part of that surface, and that surface is a toroidal surface. So mathematically speaking, that geometry is a torus, and therefore anything that comes from that torus is called a toroidal surface. Now, a very basic example of how we have to think about shapes in origami practice is that you have to go back to the first principle, which is that if you look at a creasing pattern, you have to immediately think about what shape is it going to make 3-dimensionally when you fold it. So in this case, for instance, these, if you just look at the 2D creasing patterns, they all look very different. There are 5 very, very different creasing patterns. But once they are folded up, then on the left, you notice that all of these actually have a cylindrical shape. So they are all essentially cylinders, but the surface articulation of each of these is different. So they all look different, but in essence, they are geometrically speaking all the same. Now, if I were to start taking this to the sphere of architecture and saying, okay, now this cylinder will become a vault for me. So, okay, you'll cut a small part of it, you turn it down, you'll place it on a ground plane. And then, of course, you start working on the structural aspects before anything else, the dimensions of the space and the structural aspect. So the structural testing of it, where you'll see what kind of stresses are coming on the sheet. So that colored diagram that you see at the bottom tells you where the stresses on this particular folded geometric form, which is Yoshimura tube, actually are. Now, we've all working with computers all the time now. The underlying basis for computers, as we learned in school, is the binary system. So the computer understands everything that we communicate by reducing everything down to zeros and ones. So for instance, hello, my name is understood as a string of zeros and ones by the computer. So at the essence of origami practice is this same logic of the binary system, where the mountain fold and the valley fold, these two are the only sets of things that are necessary to kind of completely exhibit the entire range of all the complex geometries that are possible using origami. So just as the computer performs so many functions, from buying buying stuff on Amazon, to making a complex 3D, to generating its rendering, to making a walkthrough, to doing your banking for you with net banking and online banking, and so on and so forth. All the things that are possible in the origami language, essentially reducible down to MV, M for say a 1 and V for say a 0. So now within that language, suppose again, if I'm looking at the example of the vault, and I say that, okay, I had a regular vault, but I want to distort it, which is what does happen in architecture, especially if you're doing something with parameters. So you need the entrance of the vault to visible to you guys. So I'm not able to show the video, but anyways, I'll carry on. This form has a sensor in the center, and for an event, 7 or 8 of these were made, and they were interactive in the sense that the whole form was responding to movement below it. So if you would stand under it, then and wave to it, for instance, it would stop, go back to its start position, and then slowly come down and interact with you. So eventually these are more fun and playful things started becoming more serious, in the sense that this was a lightweight railway station roof, a proposal for a railway station roof in Bangalore. This on the top left is a proposal for north lights in a private airport in Shimoga in Karnataka. And again, in both these proposals, the idea was to activate the roof with solar panels in a way that the light would keep coming through as north light, and on the south face we would maximize the folds on the roof in a way that typically the solar panel is always fixed in a certain orientation and angle. So here the idea was that the efficacy of the roof to capture sunlight would increase many-fold, because different facets of the roof are oriented to different directions, ranging from the east to the west through the south. And therefore, at any given point during the day, the sunlight will continue to be um, absorbed by the solar panel at a higher efficiency than you would if the panels were all fixed at a certain orientation. In interior projects, aesthetic aspects of the folds, for instance, as well as the cost and the implication of building things which are solid, but if you reduce them down to surfaces and fold them from the sheets, were all explored. For instance, here, a hexagonal cylinder was chopped at two different angles. And if you were to make this out of something solid, it would be a heavy thing. The overall weight on the wall would be a lot. But this was reduced down to a very basic opened out surface development form. And then those were reassembled back into this solid looking form. Actually, it's hollow inside. And a number of these were then assembled together to play with the light, because each surface then behaves as a reflecting mirror-like surface. And playfully, if all these hexagonal geometries are oriented in different directions, automatically you get this very beautiful effect of the light on the wall. This is another set of family of geometries called Kepler points or polyhedra. And these polyhedrons are an abstract branch of mathematics, so typically don't use them in architecture, for instance. But they have certain geometric properties. So here this was a playful thing where at the Pune Design Festival in 2015, we designed the backdrop. And then that knowledge then came back to us in the sense that we were able to design a acoustically resonant reverberating ceiling, where the function of the ceiling was not only as a dampener, but to concentrate sound in a certain part of the double height space, so that we will reduce echoes and get nicer sound experience in the space. There's a large double height space. So again, this geometry, which was initially just playful and as color and as aesthetics, eventually became something which was much more and was functionally useful in a space, while at the same time giving a very, very specific folded aesthetic to the ceiling. This is an example of reimagining how you can think about folds. So a sheet necessarily does not have to be folding, but you can create a system which has folds in it. So a brick by itself does not fold, but if you arrange bricks in a certain way, the overall result can be a folded mathematical array. So here, this is a regular facade, a typical builder kind of apartment in Delhi. And with a very low budget, there was not much scope to do anything. So instead of doing like typical brick jali or a brick wall, we thought that we would play with the brick, and just by quote unquote folding the brick by 9 degrees every time we place the next one, we got this beautiful movement of curves in this flat brick wall. So it allowed light and the shadows to play very beautifully. So in no extra cost, or literally no extra cost, and just using regular ordinary bricks, it was possible to generate something which was so enjoyable to the end customer, the client. Excuse me. Now, in interior spaces, often when you look at lighting, and I have become quite obsessed with lighting in interior spaces, usually you see the space and then you see the lights, right? You can see a light fitting, so you know that, okay, that's a lamp, that's a floor lamp, wall lamp, ceiling mounted light, and things like that. And I always felt that, why are the lights divorced from the space, in the sense that, why do you see this ceiling and the light as separate objects? They should be integrated. So the idea that you have a ceiling and it is the light, these are certain things which have started informing my work. I'm giving another example. Till now, if you've seen all the examples, for instance, if you see this also, it seems that it's got lots of curves in it, but actually it is all straight line, right? You can see all the pleats which are all straight folds, but the eventual effect is that of an approximation of some kind of gentle curvature happening. Now here, this is an actual curve, set of curves, and of course this is a cut through into a conch shell as a study, and then from there, studying the inner parts of the conch shell, we made these paper models which are studying the curved geometry. So a curved geometry is different from a straight line pleating system, in the sense that the lines that you draw on the flat sheet of paper or any other material are curves to begin with, and then you fold the curves. So this led to a series of these simple sculptures where we were interpreting the curve geometries, and these are in brass. Now if you look at another, now if you notice, I'm not mentioning, but if you go through the slides, on the top left or somewhere, you'll notice I've written a little thing, like here I've written arithmetic progression, like here I've written Fibonacci spiral. So I'm not talking about the underlying mathematics behind each of this, but in all of this, it is there. So if you look at this, one of my favorite flowers to look at, it's a logarithmic volute spiral, mathematically speaking, and that's what the diagram on the top right will tell you what that volute actually is. So if we interpret this as an origami shape, sort of looks a bit like this, and we've used a Ron-Resch set of triangles to do this. And eventually the idea was to create this installation where the calla lily form is translated, and these holes that you see, they're meant to have the lights. So in the calla lily itself, you have these spadix, which is that yellow cylindrical thing that you see in the center. And we reimagined this volute form in the sense so that we would have these yellow cylindrical lights through the work. I'll quickly go through these because these are studies. For instance, there's a study of a coordinate geometry system. Like usually the coordinate geometry that we are taught in school is restricted to like a diagram, and then we never see the three-dimensional form emerging from it. So here on the bottom right, you see that color diagram, and then on the left, you see the left and the top, you see the outcome of that diagram. One more example of this. And on the left, you see further complications of the contours emerging from the coordinate geometry. So these are computer simulations by Fortes Vegetis, and they show the possibilities that when you multiply a module of the coordinate geometry and you move it, translate it, replicate it, then this is the complex system that emerges. So I've been flowing sort of into the art practice. I didn't start out being an artist, but the works have naturally moved into creating things which have an artistic expression. They are fluid. The play with the sun light is always wonderful. So this again is a simple cone divided into a series of flat triangular surfaces, reduced down to an origami geometry, unrolled as a creasing system, seen as a paper model, translated into the monuments in and around in my city, and then traveling as a experimental sculpture through Europe. More such expressions. I mean, these are visual, so I don't need to kind of talk about these, but if you look at them, then you see possibilities for architecture. This is really fascinating to me, the fact that when you take a cone and you cut it at different angles, at certain angles you get circles, ellipses, parabolas, and hyperbolas. All of these are therefore called conic sections for that reason. And there's a nice colored diagram of that. Now, if you use this conic section with a cylinder, and you pair it, then it's possible to take away a lot of material from the cylinder without actually impeding its structural performance. So you get something which is sculptural or structural, while at the same time you've reduced a fair amount of material from the form. Of course, your form work becomes more complicated to make the column, but there's a saving of material. The structure remains as strong as ever, and interestingly becomes obviously more, I mean, with the play of light and shadows with the sculpted forms, it becomes much more interesting as an architectural expression. Now, if you think back to your school mathematics in the 9th and the 10th, you have lots of these algebraic formulae, and they were also abstract, right? Y is equal to sine x, y is equal to x square. Now, if you interpret these visually and in terms of folds, this is essentially what it would look like. So again, the technique of origami makes abstract mathematical logic visually present, and you're able to see a curve, a fold as an expression of the underlying mathematics. So this side of the practice I am most excited by, which is the material aspect of the practice. Explorations, obviously, all those years ago when they started, and even today, when we first do something, we always naturally reach for paper, and we create the initial work in paper. But then it does not stop with paper. The explorations continue through into a plethora of materials, ranging from parchment leather to plywood, wood veneer, cardboard, sheet metals like copper, tin, bronze, steel meshes, stainless steel, aluminium, softer materials like plastics like PVC, raw silk, cotton, um, unconventional and strange materials like chocolate, onion peel, um, more hardy architectural materials like terracotta, um, concrete, stoneware, and so on. So there's really no end to the logic of what can be folded. Like anything which is a sheet material can be folded. Of course, the way it will be folded will be different. Like obviously a sheet of stainless steel can't be folded in the way you would pick up a A4 sheet of paper and fold it. But the principle remains essentially the same. And in some cases, like concrete, the process is derived in the sense that you will make a mold which has the folds in it, and then you'll pour out a liquid material like the concrete or the plaster of Paris or the cast brass. The brass is melted and then it is poured into the mold. The advantage of again doing folding into a setting material like this is that we can work with much thinner cross sections of these materials. So typically, if you imagine a concrete wall, you'd at least imagine 4.5 inches of that wall. But with folding inbuilt into the concrete wall, the wall can go as thin as 2 inches in cross section. So you are actually saving a lot of material by injecting the idea of folding into it. So that I would say always is the first reason why somebody should resort to folding, is that you are being ecological, you're saving material by giving strength through folds. And the second reason why we would do folding is, of course, the aesthetics or the beauty of something which is folded, where the play of light and shadow becomes something which is really worth enjoying. I'll go back to a few slides before and look at this one, where it's a solid red material which was used. Red Madras silk was folded, and then immediately you see that the red has become so many shades of red just by the fact that the folds have come, and then the light is being shown on it. Then immediately you notice that there are deeper shadow areas and lighter areas, and the red has become 50 shades of red. So that itself is also something which is intensely interesting to me, in terms of keeping the material simple, but letting light and the shadow do all the aesthetic hard work. In terms of applications, it's a wide world. The practice does not restrict itself only to architecture, but we are looking at creating lighting installations, decoration elements, doing product design, furniture design, creating sculptures as elements in the landscape, sometimes to shape the landscape itself. In our works, where we are looking at hydrology and letting the water flow, from a higher terrain to a lower terrain and things like that. And in all of this, the act or the thought of folding becomes something which helps and makes the system better. So to students who think of a certain problem and think in a certain direction, I encourage them to look at origami because it helps them to be curious about things which may not be directly seeming like solutions to their problems, but could be. And then it helps them to make connections to other disciplines. For instance, I find a lot of solutions to architectural problems in geology or in biology. And the third reason is that by doing the connections, by being curious, we are able to break boundaries. And when you break boundaries, then you innovate and you come up with something new. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for those inspiring words. So it was a really wonderful presentation. Like, I'm literally speechless. Like, the work that is shown, it was really wonderful. Now, we would like you to relax a little, sir, and we would love to know you on a more personal level, as you could share some fun facts and glimpses into your life. To like, we compile a list of questions that we would love that you for you to answer. Karthik.
Yes, so I'll be questioning you. The first question that we have for you is, what was the first thing that you remember making?
Actually, I don't remember, to be honest. But what I recall is that amongst the first projects that I got interested in were these sets of umbrellas that were created by this German firm for a mosque in Cairo. And these were origami umbrellas. And typically a mosque courtyard is small, so in a city especially, and during Friday, then the courtyard would completely fill up. So there were obviously a lot of people outside on the street, and they were, offering their prayers in the hot climate. So these fabulous mechanical origami umbrellas were installed there, large, like 20 feet, 30 feet kind of size umbrellas, and they would open up and offer extra additional shaded space outside the mosque for the faithful. And as I researched this umbrella thing, this was way back in 2007, 2008, I found that eventually and slowly these umbrellas were being used in larger mosques also. For instance, in Medina now, the large courtyard in the main mosque is got this grid of these origami umbrellas, and I got fascinated by it, so I tried to make my own version of that umbrella, which is slightly different from the way we think of an umbrella or the kind of umbrella that we have, because it was more rigid and it had these fold systems happening in it. In our umbrella, if you see, the folds are divorced from this thing. The fold is actually in the metal part of it. So that's why the surface of the sheet of the umbrella, we don't notice the folds. But in this particular system, the surface itself has the folds. And then basically when it's fair weather in the evening and all, you don't need the umbrella. They were kind of packed away. So that was the first project I thought, which was like a research project for me, where I tried to look at an existing architectural thing that a German firm had innovated, and I tried to kind of replicate it, understand it, observe the folding system in it, and so on.
Hmm. Interesting. So, is there any project that you're working on currently? What is your motivation or inspiration for the project?
So there are a lot of projects ongoing in the studio at the moment. They are of different scales and different requirements. For instance, we are working with a startup from IIT Delhi who are trying to create these affordable um, air conditioners which have 360-degree flow. So not typically in an air conditioner, the throw happens from one edge or one side, and you have a filter inside which is called a Hepa filter, and it needs to be a flat sheet. So the challenge these guys were facing in terms of creating cylindrical air conditioner was that the filter had to be all around. So it had to be like uh, like a cylinder itself. And how does that structurally stay stable? How do you take it out? How do you clean it? So we are working with them to kind of develop a pleating system for the HEPA filter, and this will be the first time in the world that a HEPA filter actually has pleats in it. So they are looking to co-patent it along with us. So that's a product design project that's ongoing. In terms of an architecture project, we are trying to do a facade with a jali where we are going to block out the south sun on the jali using a solid face of the folding. And then we've introduced another technique into it, which is with origami called kirigami, which is cuts along with folds. So if you take a sheet of paper and you fold it, it's called origami. Ori is folds, and kami or gami is paper. And oru means one fold, ori means many folds, and kiri means cut. So if you cut any sheet material along with folding, it becomes a kirigami. So in that facade, which will be made from stainless steel, we are trying to introduce cuts. So from the north side or the east side, the light's going to come inside into the space. But from the south and the west, we are putting the solid surface of the metal. So the same jali is able to or orient itself in a way that we are able to do climate control. Artistically speaking, I'm currently doing a very large installation for the interior of the Bangalore airport, which is like it's like a light in a sense. And whenever I look at light, I always feel that the ceiling itself should feel like light, so you're not able to kind of see the lights separately. And architecturally, that to me becomes very important, that you integrate the lighting in a way that the ceiling itself feels as if it is the source of light, or it is the light. Yeah, so these are some major projects going on in the studio at the moment. Number of smaller sculptural projects also going on. One very interesting project which we had done a little while ago was for the World Bank, which was that we had created a baby basket. And a baby basket essentially is something, if you can imagine, is for working women. And these were underprivileged working women. So they were working as construction labor. So typically, if you see their kids, they are kind of either in a hammock, which is simply a piece of a sari or a fabric which is hung between two trees, and they just put the kid in it, and that's like a swing for the kid. Or the kid is roaming around on the ground, picking up dirt, getting hurt. walking amongst all the dust and the grime of the construction site. So the baby box is a compact, foldable kind of um, backpack in a sense, which has pleats in it. It unfolds and opens out. You can put the baby in it safely. It's got a space to keep the milk bottle, smaller other knick-knack things which the baby would require, a baby pacifier, a change of clothes, and things like that. And through the day, the baby is in it and safe, in a safe environment. And then, because this is workable up to say 8 months, 9 months of age of the kid. And then the idea was that the women would kind of give this to the next person or acquaintance or friend that they know who's recently had a kid, once their kid becomes a little older. This is currently in beta testing, which is that a number of these have been distributed to construction workers in cities like Coimbatore and Jaipur. And the feedback is expected coming from these 400, 500 that have been distributed. And from then on, then, this will go into mass production.
Sir, is music a source of inspiration to you?
It's interesting that you ask this, because my dissertation in college was about music and architecture. It had, the seeds of interesting thought, which would, kind of inform me later in my practice. I'm currently curating a show of international artists where the theme is a duet. So the artists have been asked to find pieces of music. There are interesting collaborations. There's a Russian artist paired with an artist from Mumbai, and they've each picked, one Hindustani classical music has been picked by the Mumbai artist, and the Russian artist has picked one work by Tchaikovsky, and they are trying to create a duet work which has to formally respond, in the sense that the way the work flows needs to have musicality. So a lot of things that you see in music, structure, pacing, harmony, all of that finds resonance or has equivalence in visual practice also, which means in art, in architecture, in sculpture. And there is an old quotation, I am forgetting who it was by, but it was that architecture is frozen music. So in that sense, and this is also something which the practice of origami also encourages, which is that interconnecting things, which is that you are interested in one discipline and you see how that has connections into the work that you may be doing or the problem that you may be grappling with. So as students, suppose you're working on a project, and most of you might be used to listening to music while you're solving your architectural problems. So maybe some solution might lie in the music that you actually listen to.
What is your opinion on art, sir? Do you think it has a social purpose, or is it more about self-expression?
Art can be what you make of it, similar to how architecture can be what you make of it. Like architecture could be for very few, Like it could be for the super rich, or it could be for, the masses. Um, Similarly, art can be just for you, as in it's just your personal way to relax or to understand yourself or to skill yourself or to uh, learn about yourself and what you're capable of doing. But at the same time, it can be an expression for larger, more meaningful dialogue with somebody. So you can create a work of art and that instigates a lot of conversation. Um, it starts off as a point which sparks off discussion. Um, it engages a lot of people. Um, it is used as a method for um, social, cultural, and economic stimulation in a space. For instance, the art cannot be separated from the commercial or the business side of things, which is that uh, um, that the economy around art is also by itself can be a source of livelihood for a lot of people, and there is a lot of potential. So traditionally in India, we didn't have separate silos like art, architecture, sculpture, like that. So they were all shilpins. They were all Vastu people of Vastu in one way or the other. And it's only a recent, post-colonial phenomenon that we say, okay, this person is a craftsperson, this person is an artist, this person is an architect. And we have that kind of thinking about, separating these things. But moving ahead, I think we need to reintegrate a lot of these practices back with each other and engage more so that the overall creative ecosystem uh, gains strength from this cross interdisciplinary working. And that's where the arts, all the arts, um, have a very strong role to play in the future. So architects can be at the forefront of this because in some senses architecture is the mother of all the arts, and architects must take it upon themselves to not only think of themselves as builders of design or designers of buildings, but must engage with the wider arts in a much more proactive way, and find connections where they bring artists into the projects that they create, bring craftsmen into the projects that they create, engage with clusters of people who work with materials at a scale which is not architectural, but explore ways of bringing that uh, into the landscape, into the architecture, into the interiors of spaces.
So that was like really insight about what art is for our culture. So like I've always wondered about this, that people always have this ideal kind of a workspace that they would love to be in and work on their project about. So is there this ideal workplace for you, or your workplace that you work in on projects, is that ideal for you?
Well, I'm happy with the spaces that we've eventually been able to create for ourselves to kind of work in. One has to be flexible in mind and spirit to adapt to the conditions where we work. So having a kind of a idealistic um, thought process that this should be the place where I work, and this much light should be there, and this much warmth and heat should be there, and it should be so comfortable, and all of that is like we need to put that aside for a bit, because like when we started and we were struggling architects, um, um and at that point in time we took whatever space we could afford. So we were in a rat infested basement for some time. Then we were in a garage where we, just were the three partners. And then over a period of time, as we could afford better and better rental spaces, we moved to, nicer office spaces and all that. Currently, we are in between workshops in the sense that now, since a lot of um, origami work is fabricated in-house, we need a yard, we need a large shed where we need to, do cutting, welding, joining, lots of other processes for making our, installations and our sculptures and things like that. So we always, it's a very incremental way of slowly adding to the spaces, um, um, getting facilities one by one. So we didn't have, for a very long period of time, we didn't have a scoring machine to kind of score our sheets. And recently, last year, we've been able to acquire one. Over a period of time, we'll probably get a 3D printing machine, and we'll get a laser cutting machine as well. Currently, a lot of those things are done, from outside. And as the practice grows and we require things and we can afford them, we'll slowly acquire those things and make it more comfortable for people working in the studio. But yeah, it's all, one needs to be flexible about these things, and you need to put your best foot forward wherever you are working and make that place beautiful for yourself. So there is no ideal place actually. You can make your space ideal for yourself.
Thank you, sir, for defining that. Actually, that has always like questioned my mind. Like some people have said that they have this kind of a work condition. So I was always questioning whether it's for everyone or whether it's just for some people like that. So coming towards from that, I have this very fun question. So if I were to ask, what is that one tool that you would like be unable to live without? Like which papers do you prefer in your working? But then the first question is that which tool you are unable to live without? If I were to ask,
Fingers.
that is a nice answer, sir. Then,
So
sir,
yeah, I just need my fingers actually. I don't. Of course, now we have lots of very
yeah,
high-end tools also in the studio. We have things like bone folders and rotary cutters and um, things like that. But we have a set of specialized pincers for reaching inside complex folds. But like for a lot of things, actually, you don't need more than your hands. If you have some well-kept nails, then that's a plus. A lot of scoring, tooling, especially of paper, can actually happen just with the nails. And coming to a question about papers, you don't need extraordinary papers to start folding. The printer paper works very well. Having an intrinsic knowledge of GSM thickness of paper and texture and grain of the paper is essential for getting good folds out of a sheet of paper. So you need to know that if you are creating something with a certain requirement, for instance, if you need something to hang on a wall, what thickness of paper should you use so that the fold locks and is rigid and over a period of time does not unfold and become flat under effect of gravity, for instance. So if you're looking at something which is just lying on a table and is preserved in a little cloche or a little frame or something, then a very thin paper is also fine. But over a period of time, the kind of knowledge that we will gain, anybody who's a practitioner of folding will gain is, is the paper acid free, for instance? Will it start rotting over a period of time? How to preserve the paper? What treatments to do? And then at some point, when you want to kind of leap from paper to the other materials, then you will start thinking about, how would it go to plastics, for instance? How would you go to plastics, for instance, which is the next accessible material after paper? And then after that, how would you go to sheet metal, for instance? So thin sheets of aluminium. So now when you're working with, say, metal, then there are other issues. When you fold something, it snaps. You can't fold it in one go like you would fold paper. So you have to go through passes. So you have to fold a very shallow fold of the metal first, then do a secondary fold, then a tertiary fold, so that finally you get something which is in paper possible in, one go itself. So yeah, I mean, like that, I mean, in a 1 hour talk, obviously I can't explain 14 years of experience with folding, but suffice to say that, the material is very, very accessible. The most ordinary kind of paper is good to fold to begin with. And as you fold something, like if you fold a lot of textured paper, you notice that the grains start coming out at the folds. Or that, if you're looking at a lot of handmade papers, then some of them are good, but a lot of them may not be good for folding. So that, I mean, that is experiential. And it's only through trial and error that you kind of learn more and more about the medium as you engage with it.
So, since you've agreed that music is a source of inspiration to you, I was curious to know about your other interests. Could you tell us about the other interests that you possess besides your art practice, and do any of them get reflected in your art?
Currently, I'm very busy raising a 8-year-old son. So a lot of interest has shifted to uh, engage with him and his creativity. So I have started researching a lot about um, things that he's interested in. So he, for instance, has the makings of a sculptor, it seems. So he likes to engage with, he does a lot of work with Play-Doh, and of course, he started at home with atta, and he would make a lot of little balls with the atta and all of that. So I have been researching a lot of materials like paper clay, and wedge and all that. I love ceramics also. I love pottery. I'm not a trained potter, as in I don't know how to do wheel work, but I have learned for a short period of time to do slab work, which is that I can roll out a sheet of clay and then cut it into smaller shapes and then assemble those with a little bit of slip. Slip is that liquid which you make by combining forms. We got interested because we wanted to explore, a lot of folded shapes and forms using terracotta and then stoneware clay to begin with. So at that time, I had self-taught myself all of this, but now I'm finding it interesting because it's become the start point for um, engaging with my son also. And he is not at all interested at the moment, seems, in origami, but which is fine. But he does like shape and form making. He makes a lot of hands and human, kind of sculptures and things like that. So in all of that, then I try to find, a point where I can bring in my um, deep interest into um, materials, and then just give him a little bit of a push and then let him self explore, because he has to become what he has to become. So um, that I'm really interested in fashion design also, um, and at some point I hope to come out maybe with an origami inspired collection.
Sir, I'd like to go back in time and ask a question that is out of context. Was there any subject that you disliked during your 5-year course that you disliked the most?
Interesting.
So not even like dislike. So like there are subjects sometimes in the semester that you don't want to put your whole heart into it. You just have to do it. But then was it something like that?
Like you did it under pressure.
uh, Standing there measuring, like, it was interesting to understand what the dumpy level was, and uh, how the curvature of the earth is measured and all of that. uh, but there were a few times where the class gently nudged us that mass bunk karte hain, and I kind of happily went along. So I think that was one of the interesting experiences.
So following this up, I have another question like related to our the 5-year course days. So there any one faculty or like some faculties like who believed you in the most? And there were certain scenarios where like in during your study years, it was like people telling you like it won't work out when you decided out like you want to go into this field or like do work like this your way.
There were a lot of faculty who were very supportive early on in the in first year, second year. We found very good faculty who encouraged us to read. So that really got into a very good virtuous cycle for me. um, as in, I knew most sections of the library, where what book was, even sections where some student had come and taken a book out from a relevant section and hidden it somewhere else. So I knew where to find those books. So in that sense, it was I was a bit of a bookworm, and that was, of course, prior to being in architecture college also. But uh, what I understood from reading a lot of books was that your experience is that of something that you are experiencing, right? Like, you're going through an experience, so you experience it and you learn it. But if you're reading a book and you read lots of books, then the experiences of those 500, 1000 people whose books you've read also become your experiences. Because in your one lifetime, you can't experience 1,000 lifetimes. But if you read those many books, then you become the sum total of all of those experiences. And so it becomes very important in especially in a discipline like architecture, to read about different experiences of different architects, challenges they faced building the projects that they built. And in that sense, we had some very good visiting faculty who always shared stuff that was happening in their projects, the kind of things that they were facing, challenges. They would take us to their sites, project sites, and all of that was in, I mean, the formative years, it was very, very good, because I mean, really, in some senses, architecture has to be experienced. It is experiential. Howsoever much drawings we may make, or things, unless you are at a project site and you are seeing how a brick wall is being put together, or how the plumbing is being solved, or how cement is being mixed and how it is being poured and how the shuttering is coming up, it needs to be experienced. And if in your architecture college you have faculty who are practicing and who are open to taking you to their project sites, then you should. And you should not take it as a tedious thing that if just one of your batchmates goes and clicks pictures, and then if the whole class is using those pictures, it's a shame if you're doing something like that, because you're really missing an opportunity for your eyes to be opened.
Yes. So catching from your answers, I see that you're a reader yourself. So this is like one question like pop-up site. So right now, who is your favorite author at the moment? And in what genre like you prefer reading in?
Currently, I'm doing a lot of non-fiction reading, and I've recently got interested in investing and in the
Okay.
stock market.
Okay, sir.
So this is something which I have never engaged with before, and it was not something like, I mean, architects usually stay far away from all things financial, and we are very poor at
Okay, sir.
finances and money matters and things like that. But now I'm finding a lot of interesting mathematics in the way financial markets move, in the way stocks rise and fall. And an author I really like, and who I've been reading up a little bit about, is Nicholas Nassim Taleb. And he's written a lot of very fabulous books, but one of them is called The Black Swan.
Yes, sir.
And he talks about these moments where from amongst a lot of ordinary things, suddenly something really extraordinary happens, and like very suddenly and very accidentally. So it's called a black swan moment when
Okay,
something
sir.
like this happens. And but if you look at it and you study it, you find that there are indicators of such things that you can actually predict, or you can understand that there will be a black swan moment in the history of anything. For instance, in the history of rocketry, the black swan movement has been these private players like SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's company.
Yes, sir.
And nobody predicted that, earlier you could not even imagine that there would be private players. So you would know that, there was ISRO, and there was the International Space Agency in Europe, and there was NASA in USA. And we knew that, these were government backed mega corporations which were engaged in space exploration. But now suddenly you have these private players, and the moment the first private players appeared in space exploration, it was the black swan moment.
Yes, sir.
So like this, in every sphere of human endeavor, there is some black swan moment that happens. And currently I'm kind of reading more about the stock market and black swan moments in the stock market, and I'm trying to see how I can bring some of that knowledge into my into my creative practice.
Yes, sir. That's very interesting, sir.
So I've been practicing origami for 12 years, and looking at your experiences and other artists' experiences, um, I had a question for you. Do you believe that Oritecture, as in your perspective, or origami should be treated as a subject in architecture, or should it be studied as a separate subject?
It should be taught in architecture. I strongly feel it should be taught um, through the 3 or 4 years of from first year to fourth year, or first year to third year, at least similar to how we have art and graphics. There should be a class once a week which focuses on geometry, three-dimensional geometry, and along with origami there can be a number of other uh, geometric practices which are taught in that, because as such, the main subject where you learn about mathematics and geometry is primarily architectural design, right? That's where you start using, but immediately the thing that happens is that they throw you into space making. So you start making these boxes, and then basically wo fir dabbe 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 dabbe. Throughout you
Yes,
have
sir.
these dabba architecture happening through and through.
Yes, sir.
And if only the exposure to the other geometries, the possibilities were there parallelly happening, then the students would also engage in creating forms, because then you get scared as to how will I solve the section elevation of this, and how will I cut a if I've been asked to cut, how will I cut this thing through it, how will I make a physical model of this. You may come up with a very experimental form, and you may even successfully be able to create a virtual 3D of it. But then of course now with the 2 years of COVID and everything, all things having gone online, most of you probably have not had to make any physical models for a while. But
Yes, yes.
we will hopefully go back to the normal way architecture is taught, which means that in your final jury you will have to present a physical model. And if you have to present a physical model of a complex shape or form, then this is very, very useful as a tool, because if it helps you to connect a virtual idea also into something realizable, that on site also if something has to be made and it's a complex shape and all, how would you lay it out in a system to say a lay person, like if you can explain. So usually um, the test of a PhD is that if you can explain your entire PhD in one sentence, like you can sum it up in one sentence. So I would say that the equivalent of a challenge in architecture is that if you can explain a complex form or a complex shape to the base level worker at site, that this is how this needs to get built, and he's able to get you, then that means that you have created something which can be successfully built. So this tool can help in doing that. So I think it should be taught, like it should be a part of the curriculum. I've been working with a a few curriculum advancement programs in some of the colleges in CEPT, for instance, and in IIT Bombay and the IDC department for a period of time, curriculum development. But it's happening in an uneven way across colleges in India, and the Council of Architecture is such a moribund and useless organization that I don't see much, happening by way of things there. But at different college levels, I think different individual directors and deans of colleges are trying to be change makers. So wherever it is happening, I mean, I have to congratulate them. So.
Yes, yes. So thank you for such wonderful answers. Like, it was really insightful for us. I would now like to declare the forum open for everyone in the session. So if any one of you has any questions, you can just pin them up.
I think all of them are like awestruck and
Yes, ma'am.
nobody is actually in a position to ask you anything. But indeed, there are no questions. I'm really surprised. Like, or you're actually, all of you are awestruck.
I've already answered all the questions.
Ma'am, also maybe they cannot unmute themselves, but guys, you can put the questions in the chat box.
Or raise your hand so that
Yeah, raise your hands.
We'll be able to unmute you. As discussed earlier, we would love actually to have a hands-on workshop kind of a thing with you. I know you are extremely occupied and traveling, but please do think about it and give us a suitable date so that we can organize it here on campus and actually try and understand the geometry and get inspired from it. So we would really, I request you to just think over it and give me a date. Any date of your convenience is okay for us, and we would love to reorganize our schedule according to your convenience and have a hands-on workshop with you here on campus. So that the students actually experience it,
Right, ma'am. Sure, I'll suggest a few dates and then you can see something which is convenient.
Please, we would be really glad. So are there no more questions? Tanya?
Ma'am, we just got one question. So, sir, there is a question that was there any time in your career when you almost gave up?
There have been periods where I have been frustrated. What has been helpful is that I have not limited myself to only thinking about architecture, which could have been frustrating. But because I self-initiated into a lot of other allied disciplines, like the arts, for instance, and furniture design and product design and so on and so forth. So there has always been some active project which has kept me going, in the sense that architecture is slow, right? I mean, the progress of an architect is a slow progress. Practice takes a lot of time to establish. The nature of architecture itself is that construction takes time. To complete a project takes time. Of course, things are improving now. There are newer technologies of doing things, but it's still a slow thing. Like, I mean, a product would get commissioned in 6 months, whereas a work of architecture can take years, 2 years, 3 years. So in that sense, to have, faster and slower modes of doing things within the same practices has what has kept me going. So landscape is even slower than architecture, like, and it's worse in the sense that all the concepts and everything have to be shared in the get-go, because obviously all of that goes into the 3D and the walkthrough and the finalization of the design and everything. And then nothing is off the ground, because once only architecture reaches 60%, 70%, then the work of landscape can begin. And by that time, most clients have very little money left. So they are like, oh, whatever you presented during the early landscape stages, now we must simplify it. So sometimes very, very good landscape schemes are reduced to just, just grass lawns. So, and it takes forever also. Like, a landscape project can be like 4 years, 5 years, especially at the city scale. We've been doing this Dholera Smart City project, which is India's first greenfield smart city with Ankon. They are the master plan architects. We are offering landscape master planning. And it looks to me that it will be a 15-year project, because it's setting up a new city. So all the landscaping that is going to happen in the city, the urban infrastructure, the bus stands, the the avenue planting of the trees, the bioswales, all of that. I mean, the boundary walls across the city, the naming of the streets. It's taking forever. I mean, we've been designing it for 5 years now. We start seeing a little bit of some stuff getting off the ground there, but yeah, I mean, it's like almost like living life. I think the practice of architecture or practice of design is like living life. So if you get to a certain pace of, like, life sometimes gets fast and sometimes gets slow, and that's the natural pace of life. And if you can think about your work in those terms and always keep yourself creatively engaged, in being curious, solving problems, finding newer challenges to kind of look to. If somebody doesn't come to you with a challenge, you find your own challenge, and keep yourself always on your toes, intellectually speaking. Then I think then there's no reason to get frustrated by external things which can frustrate, because man's disposes. So oftentimes we plan something and it doesn't happen like that. But if we have lots of plans, so for instance, in a jury, if you have as a backup and a second backup another plan and then another plan, and the juror tells you ye plan acha nahi hai, you open your portfolio and bring out a second plan saying to ye dekh lijiye. So that way, if you have like 2-3 things happening all the time in your life and it's multifaceted, then there's no reason to be frustrated, and that keeps you very centered and very motivated all the time.
There's another question. They are asking that, can you tell us about a project of yours that you particularly enjoyed, as well as a project that is not yours, but you admire it?
Sorry, could you just repeat the second part? Somebody else's project, which I
Yeah, somebody
enjoyed
else's
looking at.
project, but you admire it. Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll answer the second part first. There is this architect in Kerala by the name of Vinu Daniel, and I'm forgetting the name of his practice. Doing a lot of very, very interesting buildings where he's turning bricks and he's folding concrete, and he doesn't, of course, refer to it as Oritecture. He doesn't call it like origami or anything, but he's doing a lot of work which is around folding. Like he's creating a very plastic expression of and by plastic I don't mean like plastic, but plasticity as a, you know, as a concept. And he's bringing a lot of that into the projects that he's working on. And I was told, and I have not interacted with him directly, but I have been told that he doesn't even have like a office. Like there's no regular place where his team goes to work. They just take up 1 or 2 projects at a time and they just park themselves there at that site and they build it by hand. So they literally like they're working with the masons, with the architects, with the
Oh, is there an issue? Can't hear you, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I think little the network went away for a bit. So his practice, I think if you guys Google Vinu Daniel, you can look at his works. They're very interesting. One of the projects that I enjoyed just before pandemic hit was in early 2020. We were doing a pavilion, and it was a Zen Garden. This newly opened restored garden in Delhi called Sundar Nursery. It's called Sundar Nursery because there is a monument in the middle of it called Sundar Burj, which is a very old Mughal era kind of building, or even earlier, I think Sikandar or Lodi era. And they've restored the gardens very beautifully. So they've been inviting architects and artists to come and make temporary pavilions there. So we adopted a tree in that garden, and through the Gujral Foundation, they funded the project. We created this, garden of yin and yang in around the tree. So it was a very nice project. We called it the Song of the Earth and the Sky. There were 2 metals in it. We folded sheet aluminum and we folded copper for that project. And the copper represented the earth, the aluminum represented the sky, because it's a nice reflective material. It reflects the sky beautifully. And it was supposed to be, the idea of it as a because I enjoyed it, because I got to do origami and I got to do landscape in the project, which are the 2 kind of things which I am actively engaged with professionally. And conceptually, as a landscape piece, it was a garden within a garden, in the sense that it was supposed to be like your mother's womb, that you can go inside. So public gardens can be very noisy places, like kids playing cricket and having picnics and all of that. So this was like a quieter garden in that public garden, where you could kind of withdraw yourself into. And on the ground we created this patch, which was like a white Ganga pebbles kind of Zen garden. And the leaves from the tree, because the tree was right in the center of the garden, were kind of, so when you're inside the cocoon of the garden, you can't see outside. So we had enclosed it up to 8 feet, 9 feet with the folded aluminium and copper. And it really, in many senses, was like a very calm and relaxing kind of quieter garden space where you could just sit and meditate and look at the tree, observe the pebbles, and see the wind rustling in the leaves, the birds in the tree, and so on. And architecturally, the folds responded very strongly to the Mughal architecture of the surrounding monuments in the Sundar Nursery. So in that sense, I think that is a project which gave me a lot of freedom to explore different aspects of my practice, and also to produce something which almost was rivaling the Serpentine Pavilion, which is a similar kind of project that happens in Hyde Park in London every year, where the Serpentine Gallery, it invites an international architecture firm to come and design a temporary pavilion in the Hyde Park. And every year you see these very, very fabulous, out there, avant-garde kind of designs of pavilions. So the Gujral Foundation really wanted to continue doing this. So I was the first who made a pavilion like this in Sundar Nursery, and they wanted to build one pavilion like this every year with like a new architect and, you know, a new expression. But mine was the first, and it was inaugurated in 2019.
We can't hear you, sir. This.
We'll be
Yeah.
looking to build the second pavilion.
Any more questions?
Yes, ma'am. I guess Sarang wants to ask a question. I can ask him to unmute himself.
Yes, I think they can
Yes.
unmute themselves. Sarang,
Yes.
try unmuting yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
So, good afternoon, sir. I am Sarang from fourth year. I would like to ask a question that what is the design process you follow for your projects? Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead with your question.
Yes, sir. So my question is, what is the design process which you follow for your projects?
Regular projects or origami projects?
Origami projects, sir.
So the first thought process has to be, like I shared, that, you know, what is the base geometry which is going to be suitable for, if it's a work of architecture or if it's sculpture. Then I'll have to look whether a cone is suitable, or a, you know, like a muda kind of shape is suitable. Then after that, it comes to the folding pattern. So we are looking at the creasing. We will do a lot of studies of different creasing patterns, how they on test them structurally, aesthetically, materially. And then materially, once you start testing, then you're looking at options as to, would you want to make this in steel, or would you want to make this in concrete? Sometimes the material is also
You are not audible, sir. You are not audible.
So materially it is fixed, but then the shape of it, the form of it, and all of that, we always make virtual models. And we also make a physical model, which is like a scaled model. So both feed off each other. Sometimes there can be a little bit of coding involved. For instance, we could be doing a rhino grasshopper kind of code to derive the geometry or to solve its some geometric aspects. And then once that is done, then it's a regular architecture process. There'll be a set of drawings that will be made with specifications and things like that. And then once that is done, then we can start create our projects for us. So as and as we've kind of innovated with the design side of things, we've also had to innovate with the manufacture side of things, in the sense that we've had to figure out how to manufacture these ourselves. So the practice has grown from from a 3 partners to now about 33 of us, including 10-12 people who are primarily site resources.
So we have one, I guess, last question. It's from the student itself. He's asking, as you have incorporated origami in your architectural practice, like have you thought about or have experience building it into an entrepreneur project or product range?
Yes, and we have a lighting collection. If you go to orikaru.com, it's a product line that we have where we are selling 3-4 different lamp collections. We have a curtain collection, which is pleated curtains for architecture, interior spaces. The setup is very, very entrepreneurial in the sense that we've built it up ground up. There is no practice of similar practice of origami in the country anywhere, where so many architects are working on origami projects of different types, with soft materials like fabrics and plastics and so on, with hard materials which are architectural materials. So in that sense, I mean, we've had to create our own path because there was no path. And now I'm happy to say that we've had alumni from our office. I've had ex-employees who've gone on to set up their own firms, which are origami inspired. And it gives me a lot of happiness and joy to see them also beginning to take steps. And because what this is doing is now that this is creating an ecosystem of origami, commercially viable origami practices in the country, which are going beyond hobby and becoming design driven, architecture driven kind of practices. It's almost 12.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for your answers and questions. It was very delightful. So Karthik, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, what happened, Karthik?
Karthik, you're not, you're muted.
Must be some network issue. So, should I say something? Tanya, am I allowed to speak?
Yes, ma'am. Why not, ma'am? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so before the students give you a vote of thanks, let me express my heartfelt gratitude, Ankon sir, because I've been following you on Facebook since a long, long time, and I've also asked a few of my students who are really interested in origami to follow you and get inspired from you. So it's indeed a pleasure to meet you in this online mode, and I feel this pandemic has some positive side also, where you are sitting at the other end of the country and we can have a dialogue, so we could explore this medium and could connect with people like you. That's for us who are in a process of lifelong learning. It's indeed uh, a pleasure to meet people like you and learn from you. And it was so awe-inspiring, and it was your presentation, your work. It is absolutely amazing and so very inspiring. And I hope all my students also get inspired from this. And as I already requested you, it would be really great if we can have a hands-on session with you and explore all the possibilities, uh, and the students get motivated and inspired and learn a lot from you. And I really loved your last slide, which said that be curious, make connections, and break boundaries. Actually, it's all the crux of whatever you presented today. And the last slide was the summary or the crux of all your work, and which I think all the students should understand that. And I hope they all are really inspired. Thank you so much on behalf of my school, all my faculty members, students, and Symbiosis Skills and Professional University. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and giving us time, and hope to see you again soon, and with more such wonderful expressions and explorations on campus. We will be looking forward. This is my word from all my faculties also, not only students, because all of us are really now very curious, and we've already made connections with you, so we are curious now and really want to break the boundaries of the states, and hope that you would be able to fly from Delhi to Pune uh, and and give us some more experiences with you. So thank you so much, and I would like my students to take over.
Thank you so
ma'am.
much, Dr. Shurkar. I am looking forward. I do have some projects in Pune, and I do visit from time to time, or I used to before the pandemic hit. So I'll definitely be in touch. I'll suggest a few dates,
Yes,
and
please.
then we can take it from there. My best wishes to the entire Symbiosis team and to all the students. I really hope that all of you get out of this pandemic mode soon, because this is a very bad way of
Actually,
of studying and teaching architecture, because it should be one-to-one, it should be in person, it should be with the tools, it should be with our hands. And well, we've had to just adjust with the situation, but I just hope that this pandemic is in its last legs, and that architects and architecture students can get back to making architecture in the way it should be taught and in the way it should be made.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful lecture on our talk series, Creative Pursuits and Architect's Journey, which was full of wisdom and information. I'd also like to thank our
Thank you so
beloved
much,
director.
Tanya
Doc-
and Karthik here, both of you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. We thank you.
Yes, sir. So it was a very big opportunity for us.
Because
My pleasure.
they keep conducting some small workshops for their juniors in origami. So I thought they
Okay.
should be the people to interact with you. So,
Right. Makes sense.
Yes, sir. So I've been practicing origami for 12 years now. So Oritecture was a
Oh, wow.
completely new concept to me. Last year when Gauri, actually it was in my first year when Gauri ma'am introduced me to you. As in indirectly, she showed me some of your works and then she asked me to, look upon it. And I also was going to pursue to, to attend your workshop that was in Mumbai long back, but then COVID happened, so I couldn't.
Okay, sir. Okay, ma'am. I'd like to thank our beloved director, Dr. Gauri Shirkar ma'am, for her constant guidance and moral support. I'm delighted to express my appreciation to our faculty members who have assisted us in making this webinar a huge success. Finally, I'd like to express my appreciation to all the participants who have gathered here in such large numbers. Thank you very much for your keen interest and active participation. I hope to see everyone again in the upcoming events. Thank you very much, everyone.
thank you, sir. Take care and stay safe. Hope to see you soon. Bye.